Deep in the Arctic Ocean, something alive that is old. Older than modern nations. Older than the steam engine. Older than Darwin. Older than Newton. Older than The Simpsons. Now, before we get into the whole extending human life thing, because I can already hear Silicon Valley executives heavy breathing at the thought of turning living beyond 45 into a subscription model, we need to get into the whole how weird is this animal thing? The Greenland shark is one of the largest predatory sharks, one of the largest fish on Earth. It can grow up to 6 or even 7 meters long, and well, way over a ton. Size-wise, they're actually comparable to a great white shark, so much like the one in Jaws, they should be this apex predator, right? In reality, the Greenland shark swims at a rate of about 0.7 miles per hour, while the great white can swim at about 25 miles per hour. So while the great white shark is burning rubber and collecting speeding tickets like an Uber driver with an ice cream cake, the Greenland shark moves more like me before 10 AM every morning. Its scientific name is Somniosus microcephalus, which, if you came here via the Instagram video of mine, which got a bit of attention, you will know already what that means. Cause somniosus means sleepy, or drowsy, or tired. Microcephalus means little head. So, the Greenland shark, it's a little sleepyhead. It's just a little sleepyhead. And when I found that out, I cried. I fully cried. It was one of the cutest names I've ever heard, and I cried.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
The reason that it moves so slowly is because it is perfectly designed for life in the vast, deep cold of the deep Arctic Ocean. Its metabolism is extremely slow, even by Arctic standards. Its growth is frankly glacial. It grows at a rate of about 0.5 centimeters to 1 centimeter every single year. So that means if you see a Greenland shark that's about 5 meters long today, it probably started growing before the French Revolution. We think currently that Greenland sharks hit sexual maturity when they get to about 4 meters long, and at their normal rate of growth, that means a Greenland shark won't start secretly googling shark, naked, sexy until about 150 years old. Imagine being a teenager for over a century. No, imagine being a parent to a teenager for over a century. And that brings us to the fact about the Greenland shark, which is probably the most famous and the one I'm sure you've heard if you know anything about the Greenland shark. It's that in these stories, which have been consistently run since about 2016 when scientists made this discovery, the Greenland shark is thought to live up to about 400 years old. Now that's incredible, that is truly spectacular. But I did some digging. The truth might be even crazier.
You can't handle the truth!
The scientists, what they did is they did radiocarbon dating on the proteins of the Greenland shark's eyes. We'll get into why that's cool later on. What they found out is they got an age range, and the age range that they got was somewhere between 272 and 512 years old. The middle of that being then about 400. So it was just a simple case of all these outlets saw the middle and went, cool, we'll just run with that. We'll just run with they can live up to 400 years old. But of course that does mean that there is that upper limit, 512 years old. So in theory there's a chance they can live up to 500 years old. And then I had a thought. You see, I looked at, the methodology of this paper. Effectively, there were a bunch of sharks that were caught via bycatch. They were accidentally caught in fishing nets, things like that, and donated to science. Okay, great. Except, here's the thing that no one seems to have considered. None of these sharks died from old age.
Over there. I'm 37. What? I'm 37, I'm not old!
They didn't raid the old folks' home for the Greenland sharks. They found vibrant ones that were swimming about. These were adult, mature, normal-aged Greenland sharks. And the biggest one they caught was about 5 to 5.5 meters long. And as I said earlier, there are records. We've seen Greenland sharks up to 6 meters long, and there are stories from Inuit indigenous fishermen going back a very long time of sharks up to 7 meters long. If we apply that growth rate, 0.5 to 1 centimeter a year growth, that means we could easily take what we have studied, the aging of the proteins up to 512 years, call it 400 years, we could be adding 100, 200 more years onto that. That means we could genuinely have sharks that are alive today which are 700, 800 years old. That is mind-blowing. Imagine that, 800 years old. Imagine a shark being born, what's that, the 1220s? What was going on in the 1200s? Okay, what's the Magna Carta? That was the year that was the year that they issued the definitive version of the goddamn Magna Carta. But how does this happen? How is it possible? How is it possible an animal can live this long? There is a reason things die of old age. There is a biological imperative, a reason things die. How does it not break?
Why won't you dive?
So a big part of the reason is temperature. Cold environments means cold chemistry, means that heat energy is much less, barely present at all. Cells have less energy, that means there's less cell replication, that means there's less chance of mutations and diseases. So they live in water that's around about 1 to 12 degrees Celsius, and they can dive down as deep as 2,200 meters as well. These are a deep diving shot. And I said about the swimming, they swim at about 0.7 miles per hour, and a big part of that is because they don't really have to think about the swimming that much. They have massive livers. It's crazy. They have massive livers full of oil. The oil was later hunted by humans, and you can still buy it today. But their livers can weigh up to a third of their entire body weight, and that liver oil has a neutral buoyancy. So it basically means that it just sort of keeps them at whatever depth they're at. But it's not all about the cold, though. After all, if the secret to a long life was just being cold, we'd have Scottish people who keep calling themselves Pictish and warning about Romans down south.
I'm sure I can handle myself if I come across a primitive Highland Pict.
See, when we eventually decoded the Greenland shark's genome, we found something just spectacular. So, humans have something like 3.2, 3.3 billion base pairs in their DNA. Great, that's a nice amount. That's a perfectly respectable amount. That's the kind of base pairs. You take that amount of base pairs home to meet the family, and your dad's like, yeah, firm handshake, nice eye contact, that's respectable. But Greenland sharks. 6.5 billion base pairs in their DNA. 6.5 billion. A huge amount of this DNA, most of it, is especially designed for self-repair. So the DNA of the Greenland shark, it's just this constant self-repairing machine. And more than that, it's also organ self-repair. And this is frankly just what we know so far. So I mentioned that study from 2016 about the aging. That's kicked off a real wave of research into the Greenland shark. So it's really been the last 10 years that we've started actually unpicking the mystery, the puzzle that is the Greenland shark, but we still know barely anything about them. If you've ever seen a photo of a Greenland shark, you might have noticed a particularly weird thing. A worm, or something like a worm, coming out of its eye. See, 90% of Greenland sharks have a parasite in their eyes. That parasite is a copepod called Omatacoita elongata. It's directly attached to the cornea of the eye, and it feeds on the eye tissue. And because of this, scientists very fairly assumed for decades and decades that they were basically blind. After all, how on earth is it possible that a Greenland shark can have decent vision when, well, it has effectively a giant lamprey sort of stuck in its eye, just eating its eye. After all, if you had a literal worm dangling from your eyes, you'd probably go see a doctor to have it removed. Well, I mean, not after doing a really killer Halloween costume as Medusa, of course. All this sounds pretty catastrophic, but it really isn't. There's an extensive study of shark retinas, and we found that was a big part of measuring this aging process, is finding out that their eyes self-repair. The proteins in their eyes don't age. Simply, the proteins in their eyes don't age. I don't know what age they settle. Maybe it's like that from born. Maybe it's like that after 50 years, whenever they stop being a child. But anyway, at a certain point, their eyes just stay the same. The proteins don't age, and that's how we're able to carbon date those proteins and get an idea of how old they've been around. And within all this study, we found that despite the parasites, despite the harsh Arctic conditions, despite living 2,000 meters below the surface, the retinas appear structurally pristine. Not just fine, not just good for their age, pristine. Now, of course, we're not talking about they've got 20/20 vision, they've not got Superman X-ray heat vision. They are designed to work in their environment, in the deep sea. They see in black and white because their eyes contain really mostly rod cells and no cone cells, meaning that they are designed to see in very low light conditions. There's actually speculation as well that this copepod, that it's not quite a parasitic relationship, that it could have a mutualistic benefit, which is in other words, they help each other. And that's because apparently there's a theory these copepods faintly glow, and it's like an anglerfish. That these copepods are faintly glowing, attracting fish going, oh, there's just a worm swimming about there. And it turns out to be a Greenland shark, and the Greenland shark can just snap up a fish that comes to eat its best friend who's a worm living in its eye. So what does this slow, sleepy, very cold shark actually eat? Here's where things get kind of confusing. There's some things you would expect. So we've examined the stomachs of Greenland sharks that have been caught by bycatch, mostly fish, as you'd expect. I think we're talking 60-70% of the stomach contents is largely fish. There's squid. Okay, I can accept squid. They found bits of other Greenland sharks, so... okay, disturbing. Cannibalism isn't off the menu for them, apparently.
I hear they're cannibals.
I should have taken my chances with the cannibals.
They're cannibals.
Reindeer, for some reason. Only thing I can think is that Santa, you know how Bond villains have like a shark pit? Santa has the same thing, but for Greenland sharks. Seals. Seals. Big ass seals. Harp seals, bearded seals, hooded seals, and my biggest heartbreak. They found polar bear. They found polar bear in their stomachs. No, I trusted you. You were the sleepy one. I'm sure they're just a scavenger. But then that brings to the fish remark. See, fish never stop. You know, mammals, they do a lot of just stopping. Fish barely stop. You know, they really just kind of keep moving. They might slow down a little bit, drift with the current, but they're pretty active. How does a Greenland shark swimming 0.7 miles an hour catch a fish? This is another just insane fact. The mouth of the Greenland shark has the ability to effectively generate a vacuum and suck in from 30-35 centimeters away, from a foot. That's a foot away. They can, anything that's a foot away, they can suck it down. And that brings us finally, when it comes to eating, probably the most disturbing piece of news. This is the point where I should advise, probably put the children to bed. Probably get your blanket, get your hot chocolate, get the episode of Paw Patrol ready on our second screen, okay? This is about to get disturbing. The year is 1859. We go to Pond Inlet in Canada. And I tell you what, the best thing to do is I will directly quote the French missionary who wrote about this unfortunate incident. A shark was caught at Pond Inlet, in whose stomach they found a human leg. It is even said that the leg was still encased in a sealskin boot tied above the calf. And you think this is an isolated case? You think one Greenland shark stumbled across a human? No. 1818. Western Norway. The small island of Reindeer. 4 fishermen disappear in a violent storm. And a few weeks later, a Greenland shark is caught by another fisherman. In the shark's stomach, they found, this is again quoting, 2 barrels of liver oil and a man in his full sea equipment, such as fur clothes and sea boots, but without a hat. The man, still recognisable, was quickly identified as one of the missing fishermen from Reindeer. I consider it a bit rude that they listed the liver oil, by the way, in the telling of what they found in the stomach. First things first, hey, 2 barrels of liver oil, hey. Instead of, oh, we found a human in there. It would like a news report on a devastating house fire, reading something like, lost in the tragic fire were 6 cans of Foster's, a cracked mirror, the charging cable for a 2007 Nokia, and a family of 4. Now, I'm not saying that Jaws got it all wrong, and the real danger in the deep is actually an 800-year-old living vacuum with worms hanging out of its eyes. I'm just saying that Lovecraft had a point. Let's go back to the whole sexual maturity thing. So, they don't reach sexual maturity until 150 years old. But once they finally reach that age, they get to go to Greenland Shark Prom and make an embarrassing memory behind the sea bushes. What happens next? For decades, scientists had an assumption, based on what we know about other sharks. Okay, per pregnancy, they probably have something like 10 pups per pregnancy. See, that's a risky number though, for such an animal. That's the problem with waiting until 150 years old before breaking your chastity ring, is that, random events happen. They've always happened. Even now, sure, there's a lot more human activity and the like, random stuff happens. So to wait that long, to risk every single day a random event killing a Greenland shark, means that having only 10 pups per pregnancy, when I don't know what the survival rate is to get to sexual maturity, but I think it's probably not that high. Having only 10 pups per pregnancy, that honestly leaves the chance of long-term population growth as pretty small. So it's a good job that that initial estimate was far and away wrong. There's recent research that was done that was examining caught Greenland sharks, finding that they can have about 200 to 300 eggs in their ovaries. 200 to 300. Possibly when they get older, they're able to carry more eggs, like many fish do as well. Especially because they found one shark carrying 650 ova. 650. Do you know how big these eggs are? Every single egg is the size of a goose egg. We're not talking little chicken egg, we're not talking a quail's egg, we're talking a goose egg. 650. Do you know how heavy those ovaries were? With 650 goose eggs in it, 80 kilograms. That's more than I weigh. It's less like a pregnancy, more like something you'd find on MTV in 2006. This teenage 160-year-old just gave birth to 600 babies, but where is the father? We don't actually know how long Greenland shark pregnancies last. That's another one of these facts similar to the one about the age, that when you read, 10 cool facts about the Greenland shark, watch Mojo type stuff, it'll often say, oh, they can be pregnant for up to 18 years, which is not really the truth of what... obviously it could end up being true, but we don't know. There was a research paper which looked at a number of things regarding the Greenland sharks and the reproductive cycle, and it just made an assumption. It didn't base it in data. It was vibes only research, and it just sort of said, based on what we know about other sharks, yeah, somewhat like 8 to 18 years seems fair. But yeah, well, it wasn't based on anything, unfortunately, so we don't know. We don't know. What we do know is that the shark with the longest gestation rate is the fin shark, which has a gestation rate period of about 3.5 years. That's only bettered by one other animal in all of Animal Kingdom, the alpine salamander, which has a gestation period of about 4.5 years. Now, from what we know about the Greenland shark, which is that it does everything as slow as possible, it's very likely that they have a gestation period 5 years and up. Who knows how far? Could be 18 years. Where are they born? We don't know. We've never seen any evidence of where Greenland sharks are born. But almost certainly, from what we do know, they're not born anywhere near Greenland. Much like their namesake nation, their name is a lie. Greenland isn't green, and Greenland sharks are not from Greenland. There was a comprehensive study that studied catch data from about 1,600 Greenland sharks across the North Atlantic over a long period of time, essentially looking at where were they picked up, whether they were picked up on purpose or by accident, simply where were they found. The study found that neither pregnant females nor newborn pups had ever been recorded in the fjords or around the continental shelf of the higher Arctic. And the best we've found in terms of young Greenland sharks, these were recorded typically around the mid-Atlantic ridge in the Irminga Sea, south of Iceland. But then it gets even a bit more strange. See, I guess scientists have discovered what you could call a creche or a nursery for Greenland sharks. That's an area which I think is pronounced Skagerrak, which is the area, you know, that bit, you look at a map between sort of Norway, Denmark and Sweden. They seem to spend their time in Skagerrak until they hit about 2 meters long. Yeah, we're talking probably 100, 150 years of growing time in there. It's very rare to find adults there. The adults don't stick around and parent them. It really is. They just sort of drop them off at daycare. And then say, okay, stay here for 100 years. I'm going getting a pack of seaweed cigarettes. A Greenland shark might be born around the mid-Atlantic ridge, spend its teenage century in Scandinavia, and then later migrate up into the Arctic. Who do you think eats the Greenland shark? They have basically no natural predators. Really, humans are probably the closest thing you've got to a predator of the Greenland sharks. We did hunt them pretty extensively in the past, whether you're talking indigenous communities in the Arctic or the more industrialized nations, especially around World War II. So, I mentioned about their liver oil. So their liver oil, it's very nutritious, you know, big on omega-3, big on vitamin A. You can still buy it today, you know, for health benefits. It's much more expensive than other fish oils. And the oil could be used for other things. It was used for lamps, engine oils. Oh, and they realised it could be used to make dynamite. So that was why during World War II they hunted a lot of Greenland sharks, because they were like, we can turn these 800-year-old things with worms in their eyes into dynamite. So Greenland sharks helped win World War II, I guess. Yay.
Wait a minute! You didn't learn how World War II ended! We won!
But let's get to the meat. You see, their flesh contains really high levels of urea and trimethylene oxide. It doesn't make for good eating though. Historical accounts from across the Arctic describe a phenomenon known as getting shark drunk. You see, all these toxic chemicals in the meat produce a deeply, deeply unpleasant drunken haze, causing neurological symptoms, stumbling and slurred speech, hallucinations, and even temporary paralysis. In Greenland and Iceland, where there is a tradition of eating the Greenland shark, in Iceland they call it hokol, and the only way to do that safely is to bury it. They call it fermented shark because they bury it, they drain the blood, they dry it, they hang it, and they bury it, and this process can take up to a year to make it safe. People wonder how we discovered things like, oh, how did you get milk from cows? But no, this is the real thing I want to know. Who saw someone eating the flesh of a Greenland shark, start having hallucinations and paralysis, and then said, it's worth another go, right? Especially because it is one of the worst tastes you will ever experience. Anthony Bourdain himself called it the single worst, most disgusting and terrible thing he'd ever eaten.
That is, I think, the word unspeakably nasty.
Despite this, it is considered very much a traditional delicacy, especially in Iceland. This brings me to my own personal story with the shark. Yes, I'm a hardcore vegan who has eaten a bit of an endangered species. I know. This hopefully will be setting some of that right again, okay? But here's my story with it. So, I worked on boats in Iceland for quite some time, and my company was doing a private tour, a very fancy private tour. Or, you know, people in suits and waiters walking around with fancy little foods on plates, serving salmon, haddock, cheese, a lock of Björk's hair, just the kind of things you eat every day in Iceland. I refuse them all. I'm much too professional. I'm at work. I'm guiding. I'm watching for whales. I'm watching for animals. I'm talking about whatever I'm talking about. I'm keeping professional. But then there's a period when not much has happened on the sea. And a waiter comes around. And the little pieces, little kind of yellowy, pinky, white pieces of horkål, of shark. And the waiter comes around and offers it. Nothing's happened in the ocean. Sure, why not? Why not? I take it. I put it in my mouth. Basically, right at the moment, I pop it in my mouth before I've closed my mouth and begun to absorb the flavours. At that moment, a whale, I think it was a minke whale, pops up at the very bow of the boat. So I've got my, whale appears, automatic mode. I flip on the microphone to tell everyone, there's a whale in front of the boat, let's go see the whale. That's the intention. What really happens is, after all this then, after all we've talked about, why does the Greenland shark matter? At all. Why does it matter? After all, they're basically deep sea ancient aliens that have been around since before Isaac Newton invented gravity. They're as far from humans as you could possibly imagine. First of all, this over-emotional bleeding heart says that every living thing that has ever lived and will ever live has an intrinsic value, and life means value, and we should never need any more than that. Do you have any idea just how few animals connect the deep sea to the surface? It's so few. Nutrient cycling is so impossibly important. So having these few real proper links that bring nutrients, whether that's through their waste, whether that's through what they've eaten, whether that's through them dying themselves, that nutrient cycling, over 2,000 meters of nutrient cycling they're able to provide is hugely, massively important. And frankly, the biological insanity that we've learned today means that humans stand to benefit so much from what we can learn, helping conditions like poor eyesight to even as far as curing or at least delaying cancer. The IUCN lists it as a vulnerable species, even though data on it is, as you can imagine, for such an elusive species, data is quite limited. There's no proper extensive population studies ever been done. But population genetics do paint a disturbing picture. Genomic analysis, essentially seeing the variation in the gene pool, does seem to suggest that there is a long-term decline happening. There's just a lot less variation in their genes, which suggests they're not as far as inbreeding, but they're not as varied as they used to be. We live in such a world obsessed with speed, optimization, efficiency, but this little sleepyhead points such a different way forward. Slowing everything down, accepting huge imperfections, prioritizing endurance over performance. Somewhere beneath the Arctic ice right now, there's a shark that's older than modern science itself, just drifting through the dark. Not in a hurry, not in a fuss. Just quietly proving that life doesn't need to rush to make a difference. What a journey this has been. I have learned so much of this with you. I came into this thinking I knew a lot. How I didn't. I'm sorry for the length of this video. This was supposed to be a quick 10 minutes. Everything I looked up ended up being, well, that's insane. I've got to delve into that further. So here's what we've learned. They swim at a speed of less than half a mile an hour. They're little sleepyheads. They grow up to a centimetre a year, and they don't reach sexual maturity until age 150. They could potentially live up to 800 years old. They're perfectly designed animals to live for a long time in the freezing cold, with bodies filled with self-repairing DNA. Almost all of them have a parasite living in their eyes, but they can somehow see perfectly fine anyway. They eat everything from fish to polar bears to humans, and they can carry up to 600 eggs at one time, and their ovaries can weigh 80 kilograms. More than me. We've no real idea where they give birth, but they seem to spend their formative years around Scandinavia. Eating them could get you very, very drunk and having some hallucinations. And they are a truly unique link across space and time, unlike anything else on Earth. And despite all this, we've barely scratched the surface. We don't know where they mate, we don't know where they give birth, we don't know how long pregnancy lasts, we don't truly know how long they live. We don't know how many of them there are. Reliable photos have only started existing in the last 20 years. The Greenland shark has been here for truly millions and millions of years, but we've only started understanding them in about the last 10 years. Some answers are probably going to take longer than our human lifetimes to find. But somewhere in the dark, there's a little Greenland shark, a little sleepyhead, dreaming of that first day, awkwardly fumbling with the shoelaces of some dead sunken human in the year 2200. This has been Jack with the Arctic Beyond. This has been such a pleasure to research, to study, to write for you. I hope you've had a really good time with this video. I hope you felt you've learned some cool things. Again, I'm sorry for the length of the video. As always, YouTube things, which I'm not good at. I'm obviously trying to grow this channel, but I'm not naturally good at it. I think I'm just good at talking about science. But YouTube things, if you want to help the channel, make sure to like, subscribe, comment. All of it really helps. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today. Hope you stay safe, hope you stay warm. Hope you, live to 800 years old. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.